All right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today, Anthony Soohoo. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. So we'll do this podcast. There's kind of four kind of broad things here that are just going to make this fascinating. And I'll lay it out. None of this is a spoiler, but Anthony starts out at some pretty famous tech companies, which is kind of interesting. Then builds his own company, which is great. Sells that company to one of the biggest corporations in the world, where he becomes one of their big executives, and has now turned his some of his attention to AI, like a lot of us. But I thought I'd start off early. You start off your career in kind of this world of it's Inktomi, it's Apple, it's Yahoo, right? Like back when companies weren't worth $1 trillion, it wasn't obvious that this, like when you come out of business school at that time, wasn't it like, oh, you should go to McKinsey or Goldman or something like that? Or am I getting the timing of this wrong?
No, I think you got it right. Maybe what I'll do is even tell you a little bit about my childhood, which is
Yeah,
interesting of how I got into tech.
yeah.
I fell in love with technology when I was about 12, when my parents got me an Apple IIe. And I think that the kind of understanding how to program on an Apple IIe really gave me a passion for technology and controlling it. One of the things that people don't know is that I spent my summer internship between my junior year and senior year in college at Apple. In fact, I digitized their first database to track all their global suppliers, and then help them negotiate a plastics contract. When I was invited to go back, I ended up joining investment banking and ended up realizing fairly quickly I had made a huge grave mistake coming out of school and trying to get into finance, because I'm, at the end of the day, a product person. And that was not few and far between in terms of work on product. So I quickly made the pivot, actually about 7 months into it, and went back to Apple, running back to Apple. And then through a series of happenstance, ended up becoming product manager for their PowerBook line, which was at the time pretty revolutionary and hip, and then took off to business school. I would say even when I was in business school coming out, tech was when I entered business school, it was not necessarily the place to be, but certainly when I came out, the dot-com boom, I'm sorry, was in full force. And coming back from Boston, I really wanted to work on infrastructure. So I joined, a lot of people might not know this at the time, the premier internet infrastructure company called Inktomi, which was big on web search, big on CDN. And then I was taking their horizontal search engine and trying to build a vertical product search around it for commerce. And so that's kind of how I started my career.
Right. So was Steve Jobs in the mix at all when you were? I mean, obviously he's in the mix. Did you interact with him at all when he was?
There was always a presence. I was there when John Scully was there.
Okay, yeah, wow,
And there was always, because the PowerBook line was, Steve would have already been gone for 6 or 7 years. But the interesting thing is there was always these questions from the product team saying, what would Steve do?
yeah,
There was less anything about what would anyone else do, but his presence was certainly being felt as we're going through the early stages of launching the first laptops. Funny enough, when I went to business school, I traded emails, and I was talking to Steve about going back to Apple to work on a school project with him and potentially joining. And I still have some of those email exchanges that were great. Ended up not doing it, and then coming out and joining Inktomi instead.
it's crazy. Are there? I mean, his sort of legend and the number of people who quote things that he said or did. Are there any guys like that anymore? I feel like there's not guys like that anymore. Like there's great CEOs, and I don't know, maybe Sam Altman's like that or something. I feel like, I don't know, he was sort of a time maybe.
I think he's certainly a one of a kind in terms of, but I would say that if you take pieces of him, in terms of his clarity about business and his direction, I think I get that a lot actually from Warren Buffett when I read him. And then,
Interesting.
and then when I think about product sense, I do get some pieces of that, I think, through Elon and maybe Sam.
That's right.
I would say, so you get bits and pieces, but certainly I don't think there's one person that had it. And that's what makes this world so
Yeah.
unique. We're all so different.
So somehow, and you're at Inktomi too, which I wanted to ask. My understanding is that everything kind of gets rewritten in history, right? Like a couple guys at Stanford invented Google, invented AdWords, $1 trillion company. But weren't there other search engines doing things similar to Google, or did they really figure something out that none of the other search engines did?
Yeah, so Inktomi at the time was powering, I would say, over 90% of all the web searches at the time. because they had this model where they didn't see themselves as the destination. And in fact, they were powering the search for Excite at Home, for Yahoo. If you remember the website called iWan and a few
Yes.
others that had started,
Yeah.
there was Alta Vista that had their own
Right.
destination. And then there was something called Ask Jeeves. But the majority of all the searches and where the traffic and queries were happening was really at InktoMe, because we had powered all these other web portals, which are the doorways to the web at the time.
Right. I always thought I1 was a great idea. It was, as I recall, it was a search engine. And it was like they were like, it's identical to the other search engines, except every day we give away $10,000 or something like that. And then once a year we give away $15 million. And every time you search, that's like another lottery ticket. That
Yeah,
was
I think you're right. And
something
that
like that.
that goes to show you how crazy that era was, because instead of, I think the clients really pushing for search relevancy, they were thinking how to get more people to the site. And what they did missed was, maybe I should just make my queries a lot more relevant. I think search at the time, crazy enough to say, but there was no business model yet at the time. I mean, Ink2Me, look at it from a query per thousand basis, and they were using search really as a loss leader or a break-even proposition at best to sell their CDN or content delivery network
Yeah.
services. So it was much more of a service they needed to offer, but it was not, in their mind, the moneymaker. And then there was this tiny company, as you remember, from Idea Lab down in Pasadena called GoTo that
Yeah.
created this model that eventually became Overture and the sponsored search business that became the greatest cash machine, I think, in the history of business.
Right. Now, where in this, a couple things happen at some point. So at some point, this whole thing crashes, right? The dot-com bubble that you came to. Everyone else goes back to consulting, right? But you didn't somehow, or did you? And like,
No.
how do you kind of get through that tsunami of 2002 when it's over? People would literally say things like everything that's ever been invented for the internet's already been invented, so move on. How do you you like navigate that?
Well, I would say there's two funny stories there. I have a business school classmate, and in fact, he was a friend of mine named Howard Rosenberg. He and I were friends even before business school. We were, when we lived in San Francisco, really close friends. He ended up going to business school at the same time I did, and we were actually even in the same section. He was actually launching a user-generated video company back in 99, 2000. And I had always wanted to join a startup and maybe start one. And so I kind of partnered with him a little early there and jumped on board when they were kicking off the service called Always I, which was what I would say was, it was an early generation version of either Netflix or YouTube, but we showed a lot of crappy content. And ended up joining him in March, the beginning, I think the first day or second day of March of 2000. And we literally closed around, and then the dot-com crash happened in late March, from what I recall. The
Yeah.
other thing I remember is when I signed up and quit my job and started the next day with Howard, and my wife and I, we had our first child and we bought a house. I didn't know what was happening. I don't know why the heck we did that, but it was all timed, I guess, in terms of being naive about it. And then we just saw that whole thing through. We did, win some awards for having some of the best video service, but it felt like it was a little early. The company was acquired, luckily, fortunate for us, before things really crashed big by movietickets.com. And then took some time off, and that's when I joined Yahoo.
Yeah.
But
That-
even when I joined Yahoo in 2001, I remember your quote, because there were executives, and I won't mention who, but they were saying that don't sell in the tech because .com and tech is dead and it will never recover.
yeah.
So,
Well, and all the VCs, just as they have erased Web3 from their websites in the past month or two, internet disappeared from all the, that had been front and center from all the websites, kind of disappeared, and people wouldn't touch it, with a 10-foot pole for a while. It was kind of a crazy time. Now, had you at some point you become a leader of people, and we'll get to that with Walmart, but had you transitioned before this into managing people from being the product intern, or when did that part of your
no, I mean, I had tried to influence people that didn't report to me, and then right before school, I actually ended up managing one person, which was 6 months before I took off to grad school. So I got a flavor of what it was like, but it was more on training wheels.
Hmm.
And then when we were doing the startup, what that was one of the appeals to me was I got to lead teams that reported into me, and I thought that would be cool. Um, and then I ended up joining Yahoo, and the crazy thing enough was I went from managing, a team of like 3 to 4. And then on day one, I entered Yahoo and they gave me this enterprise software division to help run. And that had 87 people, I think, on day one. So I definitely learned trial by fire fairly quickly. And, the company was a client server company in the HR space called Resumex. And my job was to take this client server business and transition to SaaS. And so I did that as I was managing this team and trying to figure everything out in terms of products as well as how to manage people at the same time.
So right into it. So you mentioned something. I want to ask you about this. That you were involved. This company was kind of, you looked at it a different way. It basically was YouTube. A few years early. I think there's a lot of those. You look at something like, if anyone remembers GeoCities, it wasn't that far off from everybody has their own web page. If you connect the pages, maybe it's a social network. There's a few of those where somebody has something that's just way before its time. Do you think that still happens as much? Like the things that we're seeing now, like is Chat GPT just the GeoCities, and you can't even imagine what's going to come, or have we kind of gotten through these cycles quicker?
No, I think that when you think about when you think about business in general, it goes through cycles. And I do think timing is a big part of it. I mean, the formula I always now think about success is it really comes down to talent plus time equals your effort. And then your effort plus luck, which timing is a big part of that, equals your results. And so when you think about that in time period, one of the things that I realized from that period, and I've talked to people like Quincy Smith, Mike Marquez, and others about it a lot, which is you rather, as a market is trying to take off, not if you tell yourself that you're 10 years ahead of everyone else, it's time to run away if you're an entrepreneur.
Right.
What you want to be is probably enter a market where you're about 5 feet behind, drag off of the leader, and the market's happening. And when it's really hit the inflection point, go ahead. It's more like a bike race where you want to drag off the other person until the market really takes off. What ended up the big lesson there is when YouTube did come in, all the competitors that I knew about back in 99, 2000, they were so tired and they were on legacy platforms that when YouTube came in, they were starting from a clean slate. They leveraged Flash and they just jumped right on top because their beauty was instant load. Like you didn't have to download anything, you could stream. And the other people were all caught up with legacy stacks of tech that they had a tough time getting in front of.
Yeah. Well, and they didn't worry about the copyright thing for a little while, right? Like, wasn't that like there's a lot of
Yeah,
these tech companies that early on they cleaned it up, but early on you kind of like let that go a little bit.
yeah, I think, but I would say there were companies back in 2099 that were doing that too. It was just that no one could find them, and even if you wanted to watch something, it took forever to download during that time. I think, honestly, there were things like Napster. I think for music, there was Kazaa, and I think even Travis had started a company that was kind of like that. I forget the name of it, where not all the files are necessarily copied, with permission. And, some of them did take off, but I think that having instant ability to fill your gratification instead of waiting 3 hours for a download made a huge difference.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and I think they, like so many things, didn't they go viral a little bit within MySpace, which needed, at the
Mhm.
time, there was one of the early social networks that needed, you put up all kinds of crazy. It was the opposite of a Friendster or Facebook. You could make your page anything you wanted, and boy, people did. And one of the things they put on was the YouTube videos.
Yeah, it was. That's absolutely true. And who would have imagined? I'm not a big cat fan that cats and dogs were going to drive the web back
Right.
then.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got a perfectly good job. You're managing, almost 100 people at this point. At what point do you decide, hey, I can do this? I can start my own thing and kind of, start
Yeah, I mean,
Ooh.
so I built that business, and actually the enterprise software business, I got it from money losing into their first, and as we transitioned over the SaaS business, we quickly fixed their churn issue. And in fact, we ended up signing up new clients. Like we signed up NVIDIA, we signed up Caesars Entertainment, we signed up EA as customers. So we started getting some validation and really turned the business around, both on top line as well as bottom line, something this business has not seen for 6 months or 6 years. It's gave me a little bit of confidence, and that's when I was thinking about actually leaving Yahoo to start a company, when I got tapped really by some folks like Dan Rosenzweig and others to move to New York to help fix Hot Jobs, because it was an acquisition they did. I went there for 2 or 3 years, helped them with a lot of their product needs, and then got the itch and said, hey, I am going to leave and start this other thing. And that's when I really left to start that venture that became DotSpotter, which eventually was acquired by CBS, I think a little over
Right.
a year after we started.
And when CBS acquires you, do you become an executive at CBS, or do you cash out and go hang out in the French Riviera or whatever the heck it is people do?
I thought I was going to be one of those people that they call VIP, which was
Yeah.
best piece, right? But no, I think they engaged me up front really closely, and I was working with Quincy Smith, Mike Marquez, and Les Moonves, as well as a board on a digital transformation strategy. The crazy thing of this whole thing is that I never thought that that video experience that I did years earlier was ever going to be relevant again. And here I am at CBS, and he wanted to find out all the stuff I did in videos, what worked, what didn't. And then when they decided that they needed to develop the streaming strategy, I had a pretty leading voice in the room. And surprisingly enough, they asked me to run the entertainment division to help them transform and launch their first streaming service and sign up their first initial deals with like the Netflix and the YouTubes of the world, and kind of built a unique service, because that became the CBS ended up becoming the leading television network online at the time. And there's certain things that they did, including not joining Hulu, which ended up, I think, for them, they were very happy with.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting as you listen to this. I mean, clearly what you're doing in your career is, as I hear it now, is starting things, being an entrepreneur. But then when they get acquired by a corporation, you don't seem to be the guy who's like, I hate this, I'm dead, I got to start another thing, screw the corporation. You seem to move into the executive role pretty smoothly at these places.
Yeah, I've learned that as I look back, as Steve Jobs had mentioned, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can look backwards. I've learned that I have been able to straddle both worlds, between the world of entrepreneurship and large enterprises. And I think between the two, the overarching thing is understanding what language I need to speak, and then, but not losing sight of what the customer problem is that you're trying to solve. And I think that the customer problems are always the same. And ideally, when you think about a business, my whole goal is to always run and operate any business I run with the speed and agility of a small startup, while leveraging the scale and efficiency of a large company. And I think that if you can kind of straddle those, you can have success on either side.
And when do you get to then starting your next company that also, which is this Dot and Bow now? Are we up to that point?
Yeah, yeah. So I had launched, and we had a lot of success launching the service at CBS. In fact, it was just one of those things where it's up and to the right. I think the revenue shocked everyone, as well as all the growth that we saw. And one of the things I noticed at the time was the opportunity to really reinvent commerce by leveraging content. So there's been discussions about content, community, and commerce, even going back to the days of the late 90s with Yahoo, if you look at one of the early annual reports. But here I was at CBS, and I saw that people watching CBS content wanted to buy the products on the show. And so I decided to take a go at it, left CBS 4 years after I joined, and then ended up launching the service called Dot and Bow. And the best way to describe it is, it was really Pinterest on commerce, but we focused on a space that we thought we could win at, which was a home space, and that led to launching Dot and Bow, which was, I think, for 3 years, it was a very successful company. We got it to about $100 million run rate within a little over 3 years, and it was up and to the right. So it was really fun.
So why isn't it out there, public competing with Amazon? Kind of what happened along the way there?
Excuse me? Sorry.
What like with Dot and Bow, like at some point, obviously you became part of Walmart instead of, becoming next
Mhm.
to Amazon on the, stock exchange, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, there were kind of two things that kind of happened there. One is that we had really tremendous customer economics. Where we ran into is as you're scaling up so quickly, we needed to raise more capital, and we just hit one of those funding nuclear winters that happens from time to time. And during this time, it became very difficult to raise money. And there were, a few other things that kind of happened along with the company, with some of our investors that forced the company to sell. And as a result, I find myself a year later at Walmart with Mark Laurie,
Yeah. And
helping them transform e-commerce.
was this a transition? I mean, I think about the kind of things that you did, search and job search and video. Well, like the home goods, doesn't that involve moving like I don't know, big pieces of wood and fabric around the world? This seems like a little different than your other businesses.
I had no experience in any of this. And in fact, if I did, I would have said, boy, this is too difficult. What I would tell you is that I had always focused on working on bits really since I left Apple. And here I was responsible for running these supply chains and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And, shipping wine glasses is so different than shipping a sofa or a couch. But, I do think that people that can figure it out, you're going to create a pretty big moat because most people don't want to go through the details of figuring it out, and people in supply chain don't know how to create demand. I think we did a great job at Dot and Bow in terms of creating demand. If you could get the supply chain, you can piece it together, you have this amazing business. And I was able to actually translate a lot of that business over to Walmart. In fact, one of the things that powered our business was we got onto the AI game in terms early back then of leveraging TensorFlow to help us with a lot of our site merchandising and using software to do our merchandising. And then that translated really well when we got to Walmart, and I was able to leverage some of that thinking to how we ran our online business.
Yeah. So now here we are again, right? Back at a big corporation. And by the way, now, this isn't, nothing wrong with Yahoo, nothing wrong with CBS. This is Walmart. Like this is one of the biggest things on the planet, one of the top, got to be one of the top 50 companies, right?
Well, they are the biggest in the world in terms of private employer. I think the last numbers were about 2.3 million employees. And at the time when I joined, they did over $500 billion in revenue. I think now, since that time, since I've been there, they're up to 600 billion as a public number. And it was different. Everything
Yeah.
was scale. And even on e-com, when I got there, which felt nascent, I was running a multi-billion-dollar P&L just on e-com alone.
Yeah.
Until later on when I ran the stores and e-com business and worked on Omni, it was a multi-billion-dollar business. So everything was certainly about scale and efficiency. But the thing they needed help on was how do you create these lasting impressions and experience that really drive LTV in terms of driving relationships where people aren't just buying based on transactions. And that was one thing we sought to go change.
And how are you welcome? Like you come into Walmart, I assume there's people who've been working there since they were 17 in Bentonville or wherever the hell it is. And you're this kind of high flying Silicon Valley guy and they bought your company. Was the idea, okay, we need to push this guy out, or was this like, oh no, this is an executive talent we need? Like how does that, kind of mesh?
Yeah, I would say that the most important thing that I knew going in is that they weren't going to adapt to me unless I earned their trust. So I think going into any of these situations, it's really about navigating and aligning the org, earning trust, creating buy-ins, and speaking their language versus them forcing them to speak yours. To give you an example, when I first went over to run the omni-channel business, which was across stores and online, I think there was a huge concern among the store employees that I would just emphasize e-com. And instead of saying, hey, we're going to put all our products on e-com first, I had to put it in their language, which for them meant that their stores was Broadway, but we would not put products on at the stores first because it would cause too much issues. You pick the wrong items that got stuck in stores. So we create this concept or idea that we had called Path to Broadway, saying the stores is their Broadway. And if you are going to be Broadway, you would start your shows in an off-Broadway type of setting in your local theater, and you work your way to off-Broadway, and then you go to Broadway, making sure everyone felt good along the way, but not changing your core values or your logic. And using communications like that and others was able to kind of train and educate people, but at the same time not feel as threatening, if that makes sense. I think the wrong
Yeah.
approach is to go in and say everyone's dumb and stupid, what you guys have tried, because something obviously was working for their scale. They just needed to understand the new playbooks that needed to happen. And so how do you merge something that's a new playbook that can be adapted for an organization that was used to their legacy traditions?
And what should entrepreneurs know as they, you see startups, you work with them all the time, and there's various, oh, we're talking to this big corporation, either they're going to incorporate our product or they're going to buy us or whatever, and it seems like it works out very infrequently. Like tons and tons of time gets burned, lots of enthusiasm about, oh, well, this is going to happen, Walmart, and then doesn't happen. What should an entrepreneur know, from your experience about working with, or should they avoid working with folks like this?
No, look, I think the very first thing is you have to understand what you have to offer and the value you're trying to contribute. And you have to look at it like you sell anything in the eyes of the buyer or your customer. And in this case, if you're trying to partner with a large company, you have to ask, are they interested in your products and what you have to sell? And I think a lot of times, coming in, that can be a little different. For instance, when you hear would love to figure out how to partner with you, they really are saying we have no idea what we want to do with you at this time.
Right.
When they say we like your idea, but have you spoken to Beth, which means that I don't really know what to do with you, you really should talk to Beth. Or when they say this might make more sense in a few months, they're really saying we have no interest. And so when you go in and talk to an organization like that, it's important to understand and translate what they're saying, because you most of the time never get a straight no. What you will get is a lot of different weird signals, and it's almost like that movie I've said by Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson called Lost in Translation, because there's this whole scene where you think you say one thing but they're saying something else. And also, I would say I would caution entrepreneurs when they go in, know your values. So don't say yes to everything they want. Start off with something that you think you can chew off, create success, and then penetrate the organization versus trying to go big bang and trying to sell your entire catalog of ideas.
Right.
I think you'll have a lot more success doing that.
And what is the skill as you become one of the top executives, one of the top corporations in the world? Does it become kind of, is it really aligning the org and communicating to people and being a really effective leader, which it sounds like you are, or is it kind of like Game of Thrones? Is it that people are really good at playing a very rarefied atmosphere kind of politics at the top of a firm like that?
I would say the most important thing in all this, and it goes towards if you're doing a startup or a larger company, but I think it's about really leading effectively and developing the right strategy and not wavering from your convictions and your values. It's just that when you're in a larger company, you probably spend a lot more time educating and speaking with clarity. And I think some of the requirements to do that is you have to have real good, strong convictions and sense about what your strategy is, have to be a really strong, clear communicator. And then I think the other thing you need to be is a really good educator. And then, obviously, as you're navigating through this on a daily basis, as you're trying to sell ideas, it's really a sales. I think that sales skill set is so critical, and it comes down to the fact of having empathy and understanding what your customer wants, and then how to push it through an org. And if you can do that, then you can get people on your side, because it's, I would say more than anything else, working inside a large company, what you realize is it's a team sport in a big way. It really, if you're not going to play within the team, you're not going to have any success. And then it's bringing people along and making sure that everyone feels good about that and they understand where you're trying to get. Because at the end of the day, I don't think anyone comes to work and says, I'm going to come in and try to screw you. But
Right.
they do want to come in and say, I want to have a purpose. So have to be really clear in terms of what the purpose is, and hopefully you can get them excited.
Yeah. It's gonna be kind of a weird. It's in Bentonville, Arkansas, is where the headquarters is, right?
Mhm.
It's got to be
Yep.
kind of a weird talent because I assume the executives there are just incredibly highly paid, highly competent, and then they're in Bentonville, where I don't think houses cost like $20 million. It's a really interesting talent vibe that those guys must have.
Yeah, it's funny when I was the only person from ecom at the time being asked to go out and take over one of Walmart's 6 SBUs when they did the omni transformation. So everyone else came from stores. And I think that when I had gone out, a lot of the people I had recruited into Walmart in ecom had asked me the question, "Are you going to force us to go to Bentonville?" And I certainly said, "I don't think I'm going to go out to Arkansas." And when the opportunity presented itself, and I realized what an amazing opportunity was, I did take the plunge right before COVID. And when I came out, everything was locked down. So maybe I could have worked out of Palo Alto after all. But I was able to recruit actually everyone, a large majority of our team who had lived in New York or California, the Bay Area, and bring them out to Arkansas. I think what they found here is it's a little bit of a magical place, at least for recruiting. From the standpoint, it feels a little bit like downtown Sonoma, the town of Bentonville, because they have invested so much in it. And then, as a leader, the most important thing you need to make sure you do is create an interesting culture, have interesting projects for them to
Yeah,
work on, and make sure that they get paid fairly. And if you can do that, I think you stand a good chance of getting people to do great work.
yeah. So as before we get to the AI piece, and what is most interesting that Amazon emerges at some point, and Walmart and Amazon must be looking at fighting each other in different areas. I mean, maybe Walmart hasn't gotten the e-commerce thing perfect and delivering like Amazon does, but it seems like Amazon hasn't figured out the offline retail thing. What's kind of what's interesting about the competition between the two of those?
I would say the most interesting thing is they both have their strength, and as you pointed out, they probably have opportunity areas that they need to develop and hone in. They're coming at it from completely different parts of the market. As you mentioned, Amazon's strength started like traditionally came from online or ecom, and then you look at Walmart. Their strength on it obviously was their 4,700 stores, and so as they approach and get towards each other, there's benefits of being for Walmart of being the largest grocer around because it drives these daily trips. But I think Walmart has less share in their general merchandise categories, and then you look at Amazon, and they own a large majority of general merchandise, but they don't have that other piece, which is grocery, and which is what they've been trying to kind of build up because it drives this weekly trip, and they're both looking at healthcare.
Yeah,
So it
right.
seems like they're stepping on more and more of each other's uh, toes, and it'll be interesting to see who wins. And I do think, without making any predictions, it's going to be the company that has the largest set of data that they can leverage, especially in this world as we're heading into AI. And I do think that the healthcare thing, they potentially both can win there, just because that system is so broken and the market is so big that I don't think there's going to be one winner, but they're both going after making things much more affordable for customers, which I think we'll all benefit from.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you noticed, but Whole Foods got really weird after Amazon bought them. I don't like. I didn't realize what was going. I'd be in a store, and all of a sudden, there's like, it's all these people. Like, I don't know what you're supposed to look like if you're in Whole Foods. But they didn't look right, and then they'd be moving at this kind of weird pace, looking, and you realize, oh, they're not shopping here. They're the online avatar for somebody who ordered here. It just became very weird.
Yeah, yeah. I think that over the next 10 years, probably when you walk the store more and more, you'll come across folks that are agents picking up an order for other folks. And it's not going to be, if you looked at back 10 years, earlier, the concept of having someone pick your groceries and standing next to you, grabbing the tomatoes when you're trying to buy vegetables, it just seemed far-fetched. But now it's actually happening. I do think, though, there's going to be different types of services the customer wants. as you go digital. One is that they will certainly want you to bring it to their house and deliver it and put the items into the fridge. There's going to be other times where they want to actually drive up and just have you put it in their trunk, and everything else in between. So there's going to be different models. And the big thing there is that the real cost is getting that trip, that fulfillment piece, either picking as well as delivering to the customer. And if you can increase the value of two things. One is either increasing frequency for those trips, but in addition, anytime you make a trip, making sure it's worth your while because you add more stuff to that
Yeah.
basket, I think, can be the real game. And so personalization as well as just having good data on your customers is going to be really key.
Yeah, it's like when you go to Costco and like it never seems to be less than $400, and I'm not really sure why, but it's a
Yeah.
great, good for them.
Yeah. There is this great podcast. I'm sure you've heard from Guy Raz, How I Built This.
Yeah,
There is a great one on Price Club, on Soul Price,
yeah,
and how it started the anti-store. And the way they set up that was fascinating. That podcast, I would encourage all your listeners to check that out, because they designed the store so that you actually don't want to park in that parking lot frequently. And when you go out, you want to make this to be your weekly trip or your monthly trip, because you're going to
yeah.
go in and buy a ton. And that makes it very efficient for them, as well as it makes it very efficient for the customer. But it's just fascinating how each stores are kind of designed for different needs.
Yeah, it's so. I grew up in San Diego, where Soul Price is from. It's called Price Club because that's the guy's
Yeah.
name. Basically, it's like Taco Bell is called Taco Bell because the founder was named
Right.
Bell, actually. And early on, this was a long time ago, but like you really had to be part of a few organizations to get. You couldn't just get that card. You had to be I don't know, it was like military or a city employee or something. And as a result, it was a really coveted card. Like you couldn't just be rich; you had to be like a city employee or something.
No, I
Yeah,
know, and I think so. Price originally got the idea from a military base, because they had these stores you have to be in the military to buy,
yeah,
and so they wanted to create this broader club, and that's kind of how they came up with their membership model. But I would say, that person, Soul Price, I've read his books. He is probably by far he doesn't get enough credit for everything he's done for in retail, because he certainly laid the foundation. For everything that happened in the future there with
it's
clubs.
it's incredible. And so now you kind of finished what you wanted to accomplish. I suppose you didn't become CEO, and so you decided to move on. What have you kind of turned your attention to as you move on to the next thing?
I've always had an interest in taking a step back, and since that time, I've been fortunate enough to become a venture advisor at AI Fund, and that has been great in terms of giving me a broader exposure to world of AI and working with entrepreneurs again, which I love. I'm also I've joined the board of a TC-backed enterprise SaaS company, and then I'm also doing some teaching at Harvard Business School. I think longer term, I'll probably still keep doing these things, but I think the thing I'm leaning towards is that I'll probably want to be a CEO again, but for something that's much larger, because I think that there is a when you run the scale of business that I have, I think you want to go back and start something from scratch. At least for me, I think it'll be too difficult, because I prefer now to run things at scale and then try to scale them even bigger.
Yeah.
I think that's the ultimate goal. But in between is over the next year or two, I'm having fun, getting really close and diving deep into AI, as well as doing some teaching and helping some entrepreneurs on their board.
And what do you think about AI? Like what the heck is going on, right? AI has been around forever, and just in the past 6 months or so, it seems that it's come into its own. Like a number of people have been able to access ChatGPT, kind of see, oh, this is what, okay, now I get it. It's not like AI is new or anything like that. But what do you think's happened, and what about it do you think in terms of sort of business transformation from where you saw, like what's interesting about it? Like what's going on?
Yeah, what is interesting is up to this point, AI has been around, as you mentioned before, and in fact, look, AI, I think had deep. I think they've beaten people at chess. They have just done all these different things, and it's always been there. But it never felt threatening to people, as well as it also just never felt like it was here yet. I think I would say what we finally gotten was our Jarvis moment from Iron Man, where you can ask a question in a prompt and get back a somewhat intelligent answer. And that has just exploded in terms of ideas about what the possibilities are. Just like the early days of the internet right now, we're living through a period where everyone's like, can you believe you can do this or you can do that? And it goes back to our time back in 94, 95 with the web, that people are starting to understand that there's all these different services that you can do. I would say that if you take a step back, the more interesting thing is people settle in on the fact that AI is going to allow things to be a lot more effective, and it's going to make us all hopefully a lot smarter. Um, that it's going to unlock new services that have not yet been invented. So, we're watching right now in real time thing happening as people are laying out infrastructure, and people are doing tests. And unlike the internet, I think that larger companies see the opportunities because if you remember back in the late 90s, a lot of people were poo-pooing the internet. I don't think anyone's discounting it, but certainly most companies are trying to figure out how they can innovate, and use their data in a safe way while they're kind of worried about some of the ethics issues potentially that they run into. What I see in the space is I see a lot of startups doing some crazy innovative stuff, experimenting a lot, and then I see a lot of larger companies, um, building services or some of them very slowly. I don't think ChatGPT is going to be the thing enterprises build on. I personally think it's much ChatGPT in terms of their general model is really for consumers. And there's going to be this whole stack around enterprises, which will be hopefully a lot more open sourced, and people will be able to train and be able to leverage their own different models on their own language, leverage their own vertical language models, and make it personally theirs. And I think that companies that have the best data, who train their data best, will offer the best experience. But it is transformative, unlike anything we've seen for I guess about 20 years.
Do you think it's going to? It's funny. Everyone's like, "Oh, this is going to completely change search," which I think it's true. But then, over the past few weeks, I've been like, I don't know how much craziness I need in search. Like, I don't know. I want to find restaurants near me. I don't need to have a long conversation with like a chat bot about that. I just kind of like the Google thing where I type it in. It does give me like 6 links.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is that sometimes you want a tour guide, and sometimes you just want to read your uh, a book or
Right.
a map and say, where do I need to go? And I think that Google serves very well as a map. And most of the time when we're going directions, I'm pulling up Google Maps. And then sometimes when I'm going to an area I really am less familiar with, want to spend more time, I might talk to a tour guide. And I think that that's what's going to be happening, but there will be other uses for it. ChatGPT certainly is a nice tour guide, and so is Bard. Actually, I find Bard personally to be a lot more timely with more
I do too.
this information. So I use that a little bit more for more timely information. Um, and then, most of the time though, I'm using Google as much as I ever have.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. I
everything.
find weird searches. Like I'll be searching on something like, tell me more about this guy, John Smith, who founded this venture firm or something, I don't know, whatever it is. And it'll just say, oh, I have no idea. I'm a large language model. I'm like, really? Like, and then once in a while I'll ask it something, it'll write me a poem in the style of whoever. It's just I find it a very random experience at this point.
Yeah, it is. And I think we all have to, even though these things sound so intelligent at times, it's really in a very unintelligent, right? Because it's doing a lot of these based on predictions. It's early days. I think that what we are seeing is a huge explosion, and we've really hit this really steep curve in terms of changes that we're going to see over the next 20 years. I do think the answer is going to get better and better.
Yeah.
And as the answers get better and better, it's going to be due on us to be able to tell the truth or not, which a lot of times as a leader inside a large company, you have to do that because not everyone is telling you exactly the answers, because based on the limited information they have, or maybe sometimes they're just not telling you the truth. And I think you're going to have to parse that out and think about these machines is the same way. You have to go in with a healthy level of skepticism while you have actually have some trust in the results.
Yeah. I think the cool thing for me, like early on in the internet, like the first time you see it, you don't see everything. Like I didn't see the internet and go, "Oh, there's gonna be an iPhone," but you see, like, wow, I'm logged into a server in another country, and I'm sitting here in San Diego, and you don't know exactly what's gonna happen, but you're like, this is pretty crazy. Like, this is not a
Yeah.
ham radio. This is crazy. And I feel like that with I did for me, it wasn't that way with Web3, but with AI, it kind of is that way where you're like, I don't know what's going to happen here, but it's going
Yeah.
to be something.
Well, if you think about image recognition, that is really a form of AI. And I remember the first time I was playing with Apple Photos, and I said, find all the photos when I was when I'm standing in front of a car,
Yeah.
and it pulled it up. I was completely blown away. I think that's just the first case. And now, when you look at all the deep things that you can do, and now I'm sure you've seen the generative fill demos from Adobe. I think that it's just starting out um, for us in the early days.
Yeah.
I will say that if you go back 100 years ago and you those people, if you told them what we do now for a living, to people that lived through the Industrial Revolution, I think they would have thought we were crazy, because most of the work we do, in front of the keyboard, seems trivial to them when you think
Yeah.
about what they lived through the Industrial Revolution. I think, when our work gets automated, there's going to be other things that we're going to find value that we need to do. And when we look back, those people will look at the future and say, those guys are working on trivial stuff, but it's going to be very important work. I think it does free up our time and to do more meaningful work. And the things that we have seen so far, I've seen with AI, is that it helps people that might not been at the bar yet make them better. I think
Yep.
it rises all boats. Doesn't necessarily so far yet make people who are very talented that much better. But if you use prompt well enough on GPT or Bard, you can ask it and spring some ideas. But at the end of the day, you still have to go through the work. It just makes it a little bit more effective.
Yeah, I don't have when people, oh, AI is going to replace all these people. I don't have a clever answer like, Mark Andreessen or Reid Hoffman always does, but I do know that every time we've had that prediction, like, and maybe it's Mark Andreessen who says this, like, yeah, all these technologies come along and they wipe out like 10 million jobs and then create like 11 million jobs.
Right.
So there wasn't an Uber driver job, X years ago. And now that job exists. And we're all like, oh no, automated cars are going to wipe out that job. It's like, well, that wasn't a job 15 years ago. And so
Yeah.
I don't know exactly precisely how it's going to work, but the whole concept that like, oh, everyone's going to be unemployed, I don't know, never seems to happen.
Yeah, I think if you look at fulfillment centers, I think Amazon has a lot of stats on this too. Um, a lot of their folks that used to have to pick, which they didn't really like all the heavy stuff. They ended up they were retrained to be technicians on managing the robots.
Yeah.
And if you look at the retention rate, if that's any indicator, for some of these FCs that I think Amazon published at one time, it went from like, 20% retention up to 90% at the locations, because the jobs became more pleasant and more enjoyable. And I do think that just like automation, you're going to see AI make jobs more enjoyable, hopefully. We
Right.
just don't know what the future jobs are going to be just yet, because we're going through this transition period.
Well, and I wonder too if this will, I don't know what you think about it. Will this bring back like the robotics thing? Like there's so many robotics, it's going to change the world, all this. And then, I don't know, there's one making I know that in factories they have them, but in the real world, I don't know. There's the one at the airport making coffee, it's kind of cool, but, you
Yeah.
know,
I think a lot of this stuff right now, you still have to train your automation robot in terms of what to do. And, there's only finite number of moves that you want them to do, where it can still feel safe. So I think, that'll exist for a little bit of time.
yeah. Anything you're worried about with AI?
Yeah, I mean, the technology is so powerful. I think you we should all be a little afraid and be a little paranoid, because if it gets in the wrong hands, just like anything, I'm typically an optimist, but when I look at this, it is so powerful that if it gets into the wrong hands, I could see it really getting out of hand. You see some of the deep fakes, impersonations of people. On the positive side, I'd love to see an album with Tupac coming back that's created
Right.
through AI. On the other hand, you could see a lot of scams coming out of that process, especially for the elderly, that I'd be a little bit more afraid of.
Yeah.
So with anything else, with technology, I think evolutions, there's a two-sided coin, and we just have to be conscious of which one and step in and hope for the best, as well as try to manage toward the best outcome.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting times, as they say. So, how do people, if anybody wants to, this has been great, by the way, but how does anybody, if they want to, or maybe you don't want them to, if they want to follow what you're thinking or doing, do they follow you on, is it a Twitter thing or is there a,
Yeah, they can follow me on Twitter. It's my @ sign's Anthony Soohoo, last name's Soohoo, or they can try to connect with me through LinkedIn, and I'm on both. I probably spend more time there than I do on Instagram or Facebook or any of those other areas, but I'd love to engage people if they're interested in any of these topics.
cool. Well, thanks so much for doing this. This has been
Thank you.
great.
No, I had a great time. Thanks for inviting me.
Really appreciate it. This has been the Something Measured podcast. Anthony Suhu, my guest. Talk to you next time.